Thank you, Cassidy and team, for having us back again this year. Maurice and I actually met last year, 1 year ago at this conference. And I think before we get into it, would you share a little bit about your background and what your role is?
Certainly. Thank you, Ray. Appreciate everyone being here. My name is Maurice Turner. I work at TikTok. I'm on the public policy team based in Washington, D.C. And my role is as a subject matter expert, which is pretty cool because we have this internal group of experts that can help advise our public policy team as well as our other teams across the company. My subject is technology. Which I think is the best subject. We have IP experts, competition, privacy, whatever. But that means that I get to work on basically everything. Because at this point, everything includes some kind of technology. And as of late, I've been focused on AI. And the way that my role works is that I'm basically a translator. I explain the tech stuff to the policy folks and the policy stuff to the tech folks. It's something that I've done throughout my career, where I've just always had an aptitude for technology, but a strong interest in politics and government and policy and basically how the world works. And so the ability to be able to marry those two together, regardless of where I am, has been a real highlight of my career.
Great. And as I was saying, my name is Ray Lansigan. I sit at Publicis Group, which is the world's largest marketing and advertising firm. We create ads, we buy media, we support those with data and technology for the world's largest brands. And I also sit on the steering committee for the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, the C2PA. It's a mouthful. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first I think we wanted to just start broad and talk a little bit about the context in which the digital ecosystem is evolving, right? And Maurice, I think you and I are both in the business of culture, or companies at least are both in the businesses of culture. So maybe as a point of departure, we could kind of share a cultural commentary of what you're seeing from a TikTok perspective, and I'm happy to share what I'm seeing from a Publicis perspective.
Yeah, given my role at TikTok, I get this front row seat at the development of not only culture itself, but also technology in the way that our engineers are working to meet the needs of the creators, and that our creators are pushing our engineers, and the users are pushing to develop that technology. And I think something that I didn't realize until I started working at TikTok about 1.5 years ago is just how important the platform is for the development of culture. It really is on the cutting edge on the evolution of culture, in that culture is not static. It's always evolving, and there are so many different voices that come into play, and there's so many different influences, and a lot of that happens on TikTok, and I think it really speaks to the opportunities that the platform provides to be able to give voice and provide an audience for literally anyone. There's no secret to it. It's something that people always ask me. One of the very first questions when people find out I work at TikTok is, how do I go viral on TikTok? What's the secret? And I give this response, and I get a look of disappointment. The secret is to make good content. Start with, what do you want to see on the platform? I mean, that really is the secret. That's the idea, is that people are putting themselves into the content, and if you have your voice and you can put your message out there, there's an audience for it. And I think that is so important, to be able to have a place where anyone can be part of this cultural evolution.
That's great. One of the observations that I've picked up from the morning is that we're talking a lot about AI here, right? And I think for me, AI can't exist in isolation. It exists in humanity. It exists in culture. So what you just said, makes a lot of sense, and sort of this intersection of humanity, culture, technology is super important. What I'm seeing is a bit of a digital paradox, right? Which is that we spend so much time online, and there's a lot of really strong benefits from that. And there's some things we need to watch out for as well, right? And, I think just to dimensionalize, right? We spend something like half our waking hours online. A lot of the global economy goes through digital channels, and increasingly, decisions of consequence, who we vote for, our beliefs, are all influenced by that time that we spend online. So, it's a great way to connect with other people. It's a great way to connect with information. I think it becomes a question of the quality of information, and to some extent, even the quantity of information, and being able to access what we want when we want it. There can be some downsides that are associated with it. And I think the other thing that I think of is a bit of fragmentation and division. So the positive of that is I can find very specific content if I'm looking for cooking or scuba diving, and that can connect me with a community. The other side of that is that you can obviously get these fragmented groups and things of that nature that I think we need to be careful about. But I think net, I would say I'm generally positive about the benefits of digital maturity. Would you say the same?
I do. There are definitely some concerns that are valid. One of the things we take seriously is the integrity of our platform, making sure that people have that space to be themselves, be authentic, and feel empowered. But sort of thinking more about what you were saying earlier about these different communities, is something that I've noticed over my career paying attention to online networks, is that very rarely do these networks or these platforms stay niche. They don't just stick to one thing. So almost immediately, people hear TikTok and they think, oh, it's just sort of like teenagers and dancing videos. Yeah, that's how we started. It was a great place to get entertainment. But then the evolution is, after the entertainment came education. People really learned that, this sort of short form video was a great way to get people's attention and then also help them learn about something. And then sort of the next step in that evolution is being informed. And so thinking through about how, communities or platforms can start niche but then expand, and during that expansion more communities join, and sort of these like smaller groups of communities all on the same platform. Sometimes they cross over and bump into each other, other times they stay within themselves, but thinking about it as more of an ecosystem, I think has been my approach when considering what could be that next step and how AI might come into play and help more people actually create content and to help more people be able to reach a broader audience.
That's a great point. And, I think when I think of the benefits of AI, one is about the democratization of skills, information, and access. So, I'm not a drawer. I can't draw. I don't illustrate. But I do have the ability to articulate what can be drawn. And so, now with a lot of these AI tools, these Gen AI tools, I've vastly expanded my skill set. And, if I think about folks that are in different parts of the world, that, have different upbringing, socioeconomic status, there's a big leveling of the playing field that the technology advancement brings, and I think that's kind of what you were speaking to.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. Give me a camera, I'm awesome. I can take great photographs, pick a subject, I'll enjoy myself. Ask me to make a movie, can't do it. There is something about that extra dimensionality of time and space and the audio part that is just not within my skill set. It's something that I would love to be able to do, but I can't do it. It'd be great to be able to jump into a tool that would help me bridge that gap and help me actually improve as a storyteller. And so I don't view it as a crutch or some sort of form of like cheating. I think of it as another kind of a tool. And I think for so many people, it will be an empowering tool. And that might take a little bit of time to to get us collectively over that skepticism about how these tools can be used and how much of the creative process is still within the power of the person behind those tools and how much that tool enables them to be able to tell their story. So less focus on the tools themselves, but more focus on the output and the intention of that output.
Right. And that was that seems to be a theme from this morning as well, that Gen AI is very much a tool, and it in and of itself is not a strategy. So, I think one of the trends that I've seen over the last 12 months from last year to this year at this particular conference has been that we've gotten a lot more practical and real world in the types of discussions that we're having today about Gen AI. Last year, I think there was a lot of theory, it was a lot of ideas as the concepts were starting to form. This year, there's definitely a shift to, folks talking about what initiatives they have going on, what regulations should or are in place, things of that nature. We both work in the private sector. So, let's shift the conversation from the cultural context to the business context. As you think about the tech landscape today, what kind of conversations are you all having at TikTok amongst yourselves, with your customers and clients? What's top of mind for you from a business perspective?
It's almost always going to be the creators and users pushing us, telling us what they want. Engineers will build some tools and it'll get in the hands of people, and there's this immediate sort of like, oh, great, that's awesome. That really lets me fill in the blank. And then right after that, it's, well, can you change it this way? Can you make this adjustment? Or now I want to do this. And so it's this constant feedback loop of trying to anticipate what people want and having to thoughtfully consider, how to make that a reality. Something else we hear quite clearly is that just providing a tool that's complex doesn't work. It's this idea that people want to be able to use a powerful tool without the complexity, which is probably the most difficult engineering challenge that there is how do you distill this capability down into something that literally anyone can use. And so for me, I appreciate that is a challenge that the company is taking on and has been pretty successful with, but it also brings with it some policy challenges. So that's from my perspective, which is, with these new generative AI tools and these new models being developed, we still don't have those rules and expectations coming from government. We have some broad strokes that are out there. We have regulations that are forming, but they are still trying to be developed in tandem with things like standards, things like norms, and other expectations. And so it makes things a little complicated, to say the least.
For sure. We're going to come back to that topic in a little bit more detail in a bit. But, as you were describing the usability of the platform, it kind of brought, for me, this idea of what I call a four-sided marketplace, right? You have all of us as users or consumers. You have the platforms, how we consume all of the content. The publishers and creators that are putting the content on those platforms. And then the brand advertisers, which are sort of the commercial arm for the digital ecosystem. And next year in 2025, we're going to hit $1 trillion worth of advertising. And so, I like to have both sides of the conversation. I think tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about the news industry and the broadcast industry. That's the other side of the advertising, world. And so it's really kind of interesting to think about this four-sided ecosystem. And then when you think about the needs of all of those stakeholders, I think we get to a place where the integrity of the digital ecosystem becomes incredibly important. and the steps that we put into place to protect the integrity of the digital ecosystem has a commercial value, it has a personal value, it has value to brands, it has value to creators, and things of that nature.
Ray?
Yeah.
I can add a couple more perspectives that are top of mind for me along those lines of that conversation, which are, thinking about the development and deployment of AI technologies and these frontier models. It's something that we also consider strongly. For example, deployment of third-party models and where the responsibility and liability lies in terms of the expectations not only from the stakeholders but also from regulators. And then also, one of our big constituencies are the rights holders. So if you're thinking about music labels, music is a big part of the platform experience on TikTok, and the music is used to inspire and allow people to express themselves. But then there's also the legal ramifications of what happens when those rights are violated or there's copying that happens. And so it gets complicated really quickly. And I think that's actually part of the fun of my job is thinking about the complexity and actually being part of the discussions that lead to the solutions, because this really, it needs to be an inclusive conversation. As we heard earlier this morning, more and more people are going to be affected, so more and more people need to have that voice in the conversation.
For sure, for sure. So let's do a quick poll of the audience and just kind of get an overview of sentiment on the Gen AI front. So we're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. So the question is, how do you feel about Gen AI? How many are thumbs up? How many are thumbs down? Wow, none. Thumbs sideways? So generally toned positive. I actually thought there was going to be much more of a mix in this room. But it's great to see. It's great to see that, and Maurice, you've started to talk about Gen AI on TikTok. What are the areas that are most exciting to you?
I hate to be a downer, but I do have to admit I'm thumb sideways. I see the excitement, that power that generative AI tools can give people to let them express themselves, get over those creative limitations, maybe even get over some or adapt to accessibility limitations. But I also have a background in cybersecurity, and so I tend to trend paranoid. Which means that rounds out to a thumb sideways. So I think for me, it comes down to, how do we move forward in that positive direction, but make sure that we are being responsible in our considerations and not too overly optimistic, because it's going to take work. It's going to take work to keep this positive trend going, to recognize that there are some negative externalities that come along with the positive ones. And I'm definitely buoyed by the concept that there are so many positive benefits that we can expect, and there are many more that we don't know about yet. That'll take some time to get to. But overall, I think we're at this inflection point in human civilization where I don't see how AI goes away after this. So we will need to live with it. We will need to adapt to it, but we also need to recognize that there is a responsibility to make sure that there are enough guardrails in place and at least enough recognition of the potential of danger that we can avoid it and mitigate it. So, I feel pretty good about our ability to do that as long as we're being responsible about the technology that we're developing and deploying, and making sure that there's at least some thoughtfulness to how it's done.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I caught a couple of the different panels this morning, and mentions of the EU AI Act, the White House executive order. You were in Munich earlier this year at the security discussion, and this idea of responsible AI is definitely, it's on the tip of everyone's tongue. We heard it quite a bit this morning. And I think one area that, needs to be honed in a little bit more is notionally, we might all be aligned that we need to move in a responsible direction. But what direction is that specifically? And given the four-sided ecosystem that we talked about from a digital perspective, are all of the incentives aligned, and how do we form policy around that? And given your domain in government affairs, would love to hear kind of your commentary around what you see around the world, the maturity of the policies, the trends of the policies, and what you think is working and what you think might need more teeth.
Well, I think that when it comes to AI, we've definitely sort of blasted through the tech hype cycle, and we've reached this escape velocity where it has this lasting power. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. Businesses across multiple sectors are invested. Governments recognize the potential, especially on their ability to deliver services, that are cost effective and more efficient. And so I think that to me is where a lot of the motivation is coming from. I also think that we're at the point where there is being so much investment in education into digital literacy to make sure that everyone knows about AI. I don't think the two letters AI have been used so much in the past 1,000 years as they have been in the last 2 years. I mean, it's like everyone is at least aware of what AI is, which is a tremendous accomplishment to have that kind of sort of penetration within the general public in such a short period of time. And so I think that's that first big step is just awareness. The next step is going to be a little more difficult. It's that convening, getting people together around the globe. I think the safety institutes were a great start to that. So starting with this focus on safety, so that way at least the general public can get the sense that, okay, yeah, there are people that are working not only in government but across several sectors and industries that are invested in making the doomsday not happen, hopefully. You can't put that at a zero possibility, but there's at least that awareness, and people are trying to keep it as safe as possible. And so I think the next step is translating that into action. So how do you go from those voluntary commitments to the more stringent regulations? And as I heard a little bit earlier today, there's a strong motivation that comes along with the reputation of a business. And so I think that is critical as part of that trust building exercise. No one wants to be, at least at this point, the company responsible for all these negative outcomes when it comes to AI. And so I think that having trust be a strong component of every AI development and marketing toward either consumer use or even government use is important, and we're heading in the right direction. So, having multiple safety institutes meeting and now having that translate to the upcoming AI Action Summit, I think is going to be a pretty cool shift to make it so that it's a little bit more tangible. It's not so much of the focus on the negative, but seeing how we can shift to focus on developing that positive.
That's great. You brought up the idea of trust, which I think is incredibly important, and it's a good segue. So there's a great book. It's called Why Trust Matters by Ben Ho. He's an economics professor, and he looks at the economics of trust. And one of the central themes in this book, I've just added to your homework list, is understanding the counterparty's motive and how and why you should trust them. And he looks at the evolution of trust systems, starting with hunter-gatherer societies where, largely you knew your tribe. So, division of labor, if I was a hunter and you were a gatherer, I knew where to find you at the end of the day, at the end of the week, and our survival was all kind of collectively dependent on each other. And then, we grew past that, right? And that's where you start to see laws come into play and the positive correlation between the strength of a legal system and economic growth and development. But when you go into the digital domain, and you start to talk about trust, and the currency is media and content, who's the arbiter? And I think that's exactly what you're getting at here. And you mentioned the word externality earlier. Right now, trust is an externality. And I think we're starting to see that get addressed in many of these policies and regulations. And very encouraged to see that the stakeholders span private sector, public sector, they span borders, and they're starting to approach the idea of frameworks around this externality of trust, which is a good segue into the organization that we're both a part of, the C2PA. How many folks in this room are familiar with the C2PA? Oh, about a quarter. That's great. Love to see that. So the Coalition for Content, Provenance, and Authenticity, the C2PA, is a standards organization. We have 200 member organizations that contribute to an open technical standard called Content Credentials. So if you're interested, check out contentcredentials.org or c2pa.org. And basically, what it is a standard that provides metadata on content provenance. So it tells you how data was, or how content was created, the date when it was created, and its editing history over time. And Maurice, TikTok joined, was it late last year, earlier this year? Mm-hmm. Would love to hear sort of your journey into the C2PA and kind of what precipitated that interest.
Yeah, it's been just over a year since TikTok started its journey on labeling AI-generated content. That was something that it was started as a way to better communicate with our users, to have them better understand the context of the content that they were seeing. We joined C2PA as a way of making sure that we were giving back to the standards community, and to make sure that we were working toward and putting our efforts toward interoperability, which is what this all comes down to. And so from our perspective, it's not just about putting a label or putting a watermark on content. It's about, how do you give users what they want when they want it in a way that makes sense? How do you balance accuracy with that need for clarity? So for us, it started off relatively slowly. We were looking at, okay, we don't want to mislabel anything, which is about the worst thing you can do, is to put bad information or bad data out there into the ecosystem. So we looked at it from our perspective, which was, when someone's using an AI tool, AI-powered tool to edit or even wholly create synthetic media, how do you judge that accuracy? Well, we know 100% of the time when someone uses one of the tools, like a filter effect or something like that on our platform, that it's an AI-generated or AI-edited piece of content, so we can put the label on there. Other tools, we were less confident, so we erred on the side of being more conservative. That's what led us to C2PA. And part of that also includes the policy conversation. So what's that threshold that content has to reach in order to be considered either synthetic or AI generated or edited? And so for us, it came down to, what is likely to cause the most harm? The most harm would be caused if it's going to be a realistic scene. If it's a cartoon, people aren't going to be too upset about it or too negatively impacted. But if it's a realistic scene, say it's a realistic scene of a news event or a crisis event, that's where that significant harm can happen. So we wrote our policy to say, okay, if you've made significant edits to a piece of content, that content is realistic or depicts that news or crisis event, that's a no-go on the platform. We also had to consider, the privacy ramifications. Everyone's familiar with the Pope and the puffy jacket. That made a great example. It was realistic. It wasn't quite a news or a crisis event, but it was something that could easily, trick the average person who's looking at it. Well, the Pope's a public figure, so we said, we're going to put our threshold at public figures, the people who choose to be more public about their appearance. we don't want people to have any bad surprises. So if you're a private person or you're a minor, you're not going to have that content on our platform, being depicted. And so that was that sort of pragmatic step-through approach that we took to make sure that we can have that level of trust from our users, from our creators, other stakeholders, with the content that they're seeing on the platform. Next step for us was C2PA, going with that standards-based approach. So that way we can establish that trust level with creators who are using tools made by other folks who are following the same standards. So it's that translation of trust through the provenance enabling standard that's embedded in the content itself. So you're passing along that trust marker. So that way, if TikTok sees that trust marker coming from someone who used an Adobe tool to create the content, then we can say, you know what, there's enough accuracy, there's enough trust in that metadata that we're going to go ahead and pass that along to our users. And I think that, that's sort of that silent form of trust,
Sure.
Which is really what you want. You don't want to be questioning your trust relationships all the time in a way that's so overt. You want to be able to pass it along, and I think that that reduces the friction when you are trying to engage the public in a trust-building exercise, which is ultimately what this is all about, is to be able to trust the data that goes along with the content and to have that network of trust in the ecosystem.
That's exactly right. And, one of the tools that we talk about from a C2PA perspective is empowering the users and empowering users through transparency. So, what the standard does is it gives you a nutrition label of that piece of content, where it came from, things of that nature. So it's up to you all to decide how you want to treat that content and how much veracity you think that content holds. We don't place a value judgment on it. We just provide the information so that users understand where that content came from. You mentioned creators, and from an advertising perspective, this was a big reason that we came to the C2PA. It was one of two reasons. The first one is that we're in a creative industry, and safeguarding our creators and the IP around that was a big impetus for us to join the C2PA. So that's kind of the supply side of our business. The demand side that we hear from brands, so you can imagine luxury brands like Balenciaga that the Pope was wearing, luxury brands like LVMH, even McDonald's. If you look at the value of brands, brand marks, and Interbrand puts out this great report of the top 100 brands every year. The value of the top 100 brands is $3.2 trillion. So what we saw from our brand advertising clients was that there was a vested interest in protecting brand marks and spoofing. They were concerned about actors that could spoof their brands and erode the value that marketers work so hard to create on behalf of those brands. So that's what led us to the C2PA, and I think it was last year at this time I was able to kind of talk about our journey to the C2PA. What's been great to see over the last 12 months has been the adoption. And just over the last few weeks, we've seen adoption on YouTube, and there's a surface that will carry content credentials and that disclosure mechanism. We've seen a Chrome browser extension launch that enables the user to see media and the content credentials pin, which looks like this. And we've seen adoption across a lot of different industries. So in news, the BBC is here or will be here Later, they've incorporated content credentials into their verify process, using it to verify found footage. We have a great set of partners in the Nordics, in the media cluster of Bergen, that are using content credentials on the broadcasting side as well. And the list goes on and on, from private sector and the insurance industry to the Department of Defense, to social media platforms. And the adoption has really been, quite tremendous over the past year, I'd say.
Yeah, we're seeing definitely some strong interest on our side. So, for example, in Europe in the first half of the year, we had about 8 million pieces of content have some form of label, and that's been split almost evenly between creators who are self-labeling because they have a concern that they want to make sure that their content is being labeled so that way that it's being flagged appropriately, to provide that level of information to users. And the other part of that labeling is the automatic labeling. So that was something that we implemented. So that way, it reduces that friction on the user side. So they might be using a tool that automatically incorporates the C2PA standard. And so, if that's something that we read when someone's uploading content, we'll go ahead and put a label on there.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of that push and pull, trying to figure out, where's the appropriate responsibility lie, with the platform, with the creator, or with the user. And I think that's probably, one of the most important parts of meetings like this and discussions more broadly about governance is that we're all working through this together. No one has the answer. Well, I take that back. Raise your hand if you have the answer to AI governance. All right, good. No one has the answer. We still need to understand, culturally, how are we going to evolve? What are the expectations going to be? We'll get there. And I think that we still need to leave some room for experimentation, some of that innovation that comes along with being part of the development and the deployment of these technologies and really seeing how people use it. Is it something where you expect every single person to know what provenance metadata is? I don't think so, but I think everyone has a sense that they want to be able to get more information. And it's not necessarily about whether that's going to be good or bad, like, oh, someone's trying to trick me, so let me see if this image is really real or if this video is really real. It could just be that they're curious. I know that growing up in the early days of the web, a lot of the way that you learned about how a website was made is you went to the view source. You actually got to look at the code behind it. You got to learn about how this website was put together, and you might take some of that code, or you might be inspired by it. And so I think content credentials offers that same kind of educational opportunity where people can actually learn how the media that they enjoy consuming is put together. So it might actually inspire them to go out and learn how to use different tools or use different techniques. So it's not just about, how do you prove that something is real or not real? It's also an opportunity for education.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to build on what you said that, no one has the answer. I'd push on that and say no single person or entity can have the answer. Given that we're talking about trust as an externality and existing across multiple pieces of the ecosystem, we need a solution that is interoperable, that travels from property to property and is durable over time. And content provenance is one of the many areas that are included under the umbrella of responsible AI. But I would posit, and I would offer to this group that it takes everyone. It takes an ecosystem solution to solve this problem, and that no single entity, person can have the answer on their own.
I agree, and I think that as we continue to have these conversations, it's important. And we heard just before lunch, this idea of the town halls. And so, what does that look like? I think that it's great as a concept, but how do you actually have this kind of engagement. We've heard about sort of the lack of representation in the global South. I think AI is an opportunity to sort of reset those expectations about the stakeholders who were involved. I'd hate to see it go the way that it went with the lack of inclusion, around the internet and mobile computing. If AI is really going to have the kind of impacts across sectors, across regions that we expect it to, the global conversation is critical. So that way, as this process continues at a pace that is far beyond what I had expected and what most people had expected, we don't leave people behind. It's going to be very difficult to catch up in the AI discussion if there isn't some thought and consideration put in right now to make that a priority.
So we're sitting here in a room of 200 very intelligent folks that are gathered from around the world, and as we wrap up here, what are the closing thoughts or calls to action that you'd like to share with this group?
Ooh, that's a heavy question, isn't it? I'll try to give you all a little bit of homework, which is to consider what you want that future to look like. Not the short term, but as I said before, we're going to be living with AI. Until we're not living anymore. And so thinking out ahead of what you want that future to look like, but think about it from the perspective of someone from the general public. What is the expectation that they're going to have in terms of the safeguards that they want their regulators to have in place in terms of how they can be enabled to have fun, how they can be enabled to do their job better, how they can be able to take advantage of new opportunities. So what are those expectations? I think back to my own experience with computers in that I feel like I came along in that time where, as I was growing up, anyone who was using a computer was basically a computer expert. You had to be able to put your own computer together, do some coding, not be afraid to fix it. And then that sort of period of time quickly went away, and computers are basically appliances. People aren't expected to know how a computer works. They aren't expected to do their own repairs on it, but they are certainly experts in being able to use it to enable them to do something else. Very few people just sit down on a computer because it's fun. It's like you do the fun stuff or you do the work stuff on this particular tool. So think about it from the perspective of that end user in what those expectations might be. And then what's that gap to get them there? Is it digital, media literacy programs they need to start, in kindergarten to make sure that people are comfortable interacting with these generative AI tools? Or is it, maybe some government programs to have that virtual town hall where people are always having their opinions fed into a larger ecosystem of discussion and collaboration? And so that's what I would put out to this group, is to challenge them to not stay at such a high level, but grab a persona, put yourself, from that perspective, and think about, what are those expectations? And then once you've done all that, see what's missing. See whose voice isn't there, see what perspective isn't there, to make sure that this is more of an inclusive consideration.
That's great. I would add, on the digital literacy front, I'd encourage all of you to look at content credentials, look for content credentials, particularly as it becomes much more widespread through the ecosystem, and advocate for it, whether that means as a creator, commercially in your own enterprise. It's a pretty powerful standard. It's global, sanctioned by the ISO. So as far as content provenance goes, this is the standard that is essentially mentioned in every policy document that I've seen over the last 12 months. So follow the journey and join the cause is what I would say. Maurice and I thank you for your time very much. We're going to close here, but if you have questions, we'll be over on the side, and feel free to grab us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.